Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the new news. My name is Paul, and I hope that you all are having a great day. I hope that you are safe, that your friends and your family are safe, and I hope that it's getting close to the weekend. Tomorrow's Friday. It might be Friday already for some of you, so we're getting close to that nice weekend. We can take some time off, relax, do whatever you really kind of want to do, unless, unfortunately, you do have to work on the weekends, which I hope you are getting some time off and time to yourself. There is obviously a lot of stuff going on in the world. We have a lot of stuff going on in Ukraine. There's some very intense fighting in Ukraine right now. It's really ramped up about over the last 24 to 48 hours, rather significantly. And there's a lot of stuff obviously going on in other parts of the world. We got worries regarding Turkey going into Syria. We have natural disasters that are affecting all sorts of places throughout the world. Brazil, Mexico, Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. I could go on and on and on. There are millions of people right now that are really suffering. These people are going through hardships that, for a lot of people, would be really hard to understand. Just how devastating it would be. And so, with that, please check out the description below. We're going through and we're currently still vetting some of the links that were given to us by members of the community, but there are a ton of donation links down there for Ukraine, for the Horn of Africa, for Southeast Asia. We want to be able to help all of these people, millions of people. 218 million, I think, right now is what the UN is projecting to be affected, and that's one of the largest numbers in history of people affected by different conflicts going on. So it's a very tragic situation right now globally, but hopefully with our help and the help of many other people who are working extremely hard, we'll be able to do some good. We don't just want to deliver this news, but we want to be able to make a difference with the news that we're delivering, and we can only do that with your support. So if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe, because it helps us reach more people, and that brings more people to, one, get the news here from an independent source, but two, also to give back to the very same things that we discuss here on this channel. And so I appreciate the support you've already given us thus far, and we're going to dive right into the news. And there is a lot. We're actually jumping right into the Donbass. There is a ton of stuff happening. And the first thing we have is actually here at Slavyansk, where Slavyansk is actually evacuating right now. Slavyansk, a lot of people have already evacuated from the east, but Slavyansk is really starting to see the impact of Russian forces, and specifically their artillery. We've seen Russia use massive amounts of artillery throughout this entire duration of the war. It's essentially wiped entire villages and cities off of the map. And we still see this today. It's becoming increasingly dangerous. Russian shells are already finding their way into the city of Slavyansk, as it's right there, pretty much where the Russian forces are, just at its doorstep. They're getting bombarded, and while many people are taking this time where they aren't directly under attack yet to escape, a lot of people have already been affected, and we have some rather heartbreaking images just coming out of this region right now. These are just kids and young men and women are running around. There's shell craters in the middle of the street. Their houses are destroyed. This guy's entire his entire door came out. It's just blown literally out of the wall. These houses and apartment buildings are utterly destroyed. These people are absolutely suffering. You can see where not only did it, of course, shatter the windows, but you can see where shrapnel just ripped into this wall. So it's a difficult situation, and I really do hope that most of these people are able to evacuate and able to get to safety. But that is unfortunately just the reality of what's going on here in Slavyansk and in many parts of Ukraine at this current time. And as we're seeing this, the Russian shelling is taking an immense toll on Severodonetsk. The Battle of Severodonetsk still rages, and it rages extremely fiercely. And right now, they are absolutely just shelling and bombarding the Ukrainian sectors of the city. They do have forces inside the city, so they are basically conducting rolling barrages as Russian forces are pushing through this area. But the the scenes that we're seeing now out of Severodonetsk is very reminiscent of the scenes we saw only a couple months ago at the beginning of the Battle of Mariupol. Not the end, because by the end, the city had been pounded to dust, but the beginning is definitely very reminiscent of what we see here. So let's take a look.
Ну давайте, блядь. Дуэт, блядь. Дуэт минометки и новой техники. Дуэт вражеской минометки и нашей техники.
And we have even more footage of this. I mean, these are images we've seen time and time again, but it doesn't get any less frustrating as time goes on.
Вот это вот такая вот беда. И, ребят, вот этот город, Северодонецк, уничтожаем ли мы русские войска.
We actually had our independent translators translate what he says here, and he actually says it's not we Ukrainians who do this, it's the Russians. This is a civilian on a cell phone. These are not military targets. These are apartment buildings. And you can see how many apartments there are inside that building. I mean, how many people's lives were completely destroyed? How many lives may have been lost in that single attack? We won't know until the battle's over, and if we ever truly do know, because unfortunately at that point, I mean, there's not a whole lot left. And like I said, this is scenes that we're seeing time and time again. We've seen it the entire duration of this war. And that's just, it's a tragedy. One, it's also a war crime because it's a high concentration of the civilian population to be using artillery indiscriminately like this. But it's also just a tragedy. And that's a very big distinction. Unfortunately, not everything that has happened, as bad as some of it is a war crime. That's just the fact of the matter. We call out and say it. We provide proof when we're talking about it. I've laid off of it a little bit because I really beat the horse a little dead with it for a few days. But unfortunately, even if it's not a war crime, it's an absolute tragedy, and that's just the fact of the matter. But there is a little bit of good news, and that's because reportedly, and this is coming from Aristovich, who is a presidential advisor, the Ukrainian forces have reportedly rolled up some of the Russian forces in really an ambush, and that turned into a large-scale counterattack. They basically baited, according to basically our understanding of the situation right now, the Ukrainian forces have been withdrawing and withdrawing and withdrawing, seemingly making another tactical withdrawal, similar to what they've done in Lyman and similar to what they've done in other areas of Ukraine, just as they've been pounded. However, it was reportedly a ruse, which means it was fake. They were reportedly baiting Russian forces basically into the interior of the Severodonetsk. They have defensive lines reportedly on the opposite side of Severodonetsk, and they basically have brought them into intense urban close quarters combat, effectively neutralizing their ability to use their artillery, because then they'd just be dropping massive amounts of artillery on their own forces. And we're seeing some of that here, where they've actually captured a bunch of DNR troops here. So we'll take a look at this.
Так, звать-то как?
Андрей.
Андрей, фамилия?
Лубинцев.
Откуда сам? Быстро говори.
Шахтер.
Шахтер, кто командир? Бегом, бегом!
Скрипа.
Кто такой Скрипла, бля? Кто он? Командир чего?
Командир
ну, наши, что мы там внизу стояли, здесь
Подразделение ваше название.
пехота.
Какая в пизду пехота, блядь? Полностью говори.
Ну, я в этом не разбираюсь, честно.
Название как ваше?
Ну, ДНР.
ДНР, народная милиция, что говори,
Народная
блядь?
милиция.
Это то, что я сказал, блядь.
Нет, это и было народное.
Сколько лет?
Нет, 30,
Дети есть?
да,
А какого ж хуя ты попёрся, блядь?
за деньги.
За деньги, блядь.
This guy is scared to death. I don't blame him, but he is absolutely scared to death. But it's, I mean, it seems like the counterattack's underway. That's what we've heard. Now, this hasn't changed at all. We're not going to change it until we get definitive proof. We're just relaying what we're hearing. And you're going to see a couple of developments like that in this episode because there were some developments that we're actually hearing, getting relayed to us from Ukraine, and that we're seeing on some sources, but we're not seeing a lot of video evidence regarding it. So that's just unfortunately the fact of the war, because with some of this stuff, my first impression would not be to pick up my cell phone and start recording everything. Even if I could, in some of these areas, how are you going to get it out? But unfortunately, the Battle of Severodonetsk is now affecting Lysychansk. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciations here. I cannot pronounce. I barely speak English, people. I do not pronounce things very well. But unfortunately, as the Battle of Severodonetsk continues and rages on, and it actually seems to be intensifying even more, now that is affecting Lysychansk. And then we can see this as it's starting to find itself under fire as artillery shells that are coming in from Russian forces are actually landing within the city now. So it's forcing a lot of residents to take shelter. Now, once again, this is an apartment building. And we can see how many apartments are in here. Like, these are people's homes. And you just put a giant hole through the center of it, to say the least. We don't know of any casualties regarding this. But I mean they're landing in the middle of the street. There's a nice big crater in the middle of the street. I mean, now, so far our understanding is it isn't widespread quite like we're seeing in places like Slavyansk or Severodonetsk or other parts of the front lines. It's not as severe reportedly, but it's still, I mean, you're having artillery shells and rockets landed in and amongst your homes. That's not generally a good situation. As we move further down the front here, we see that a seized Russian truck actually makes a little bit of a statement here. And really what's being said here is on this vehicle is for Mariupol and for Donbas, meaning in revenge for Mariupol and revenge for the Donbas. Now, you see that homemade armor that they're welding onto these logistical vehicles. Not that it exactly helps a whole lot, but they are attempting to do that. And we've seen that with logs much earlier in the war. This seems to actually be some kind of a homemade steel plating or maybe an additional plating that they're putting on these. For Mariupol and for Donbas. So they're coming for their revenge. However, it doesn't seem like it's going very well considering this vehicle got captured by Ukrainian forces. As we continue down the front, we talked yesterday about the shelling that's ongoing between the city of Bakhmut and Lysychansk. This is the Bakhmut-Lysychansk highway right here, right where my cursor is. And as you can tell, the Russian forces have created a rather large bulge protruding out from their front lines, or the rest of their front lines, I should say, in and around the area of Popasna, because this is a major axis of advance for Russian forces. And yesterday we talked about they're well within range and they're putting extremely accurate artillery fire. And now that we've also learned, there are also a lot of those helicopters we've been seeing operating in the Donbass are actually here in this general area as they're strafing this highway. And Russian media, nicely enough for us today, actually posted a video of their reporters embedded with Russian forces at these artillery positions overlooking the highway, actually firing upon Ukrainian troops. So we're getting both sides of this story now, and we're able to present it to you. So let's take a look at this. This is for IZ Russia. These are the same. This is the same news team that was heavily embedded during the Battle of Mariupol. So these guys are basically following around Russian forces and DNR forces as they are going through this conflict, and they're going to some of the some of the fiercest parts of the fighting, trying to get a lot of this propaganda stuff up and running for them. So let's take a look, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
За работой орудия приходится наблюдать блиндажей. Работает орудие очень быстро. Нанесли несколько ударов, затем расчеты прячутся в укрытие. Ну, соответственно, мы также находимся в укрытиях, чтобы ответный снаряд нас не поразил.
So, as you can tell, so these are the Russian forces that are compounding, this highway, and they're embedded somewhere in this general vicinity. Now, I'm not going to say they're directly at this front line because that'd be a very terrible positioning for this, but they're well within range. This puts them very well within their range, their capabilities, and they're able to put this very accurate fire, and it's causing some rather severe losses for Ukrainian forces and for their logistical capabilities. If they can cut this off, they can basically, this is the major route going up to Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. They cut this off, that cuts off a major resupply route for both troops, equipment. That's a major ground medevac line that you could do. Now, there are other roadways, like we can see this one running through here, but major well-paved roadways like this are invaluable in wartime for logistics, and Russia is really starting to put a damper on this. However, we can see here along the front lines, we don't have exact positions for a lot of this stuff, keep in mind. So it's somewhere here in the Eastern Front. And we're seeing that S-300 batteries are now being employed by the Ukrainian forces against Russian positions. And we see this here in this video. Now, the S-300 batteries, so this has copyright, but we can take a look at this. It's just copyright music to it. But so these are the S-300 batteries. We've seen these before, especially during military exercises prior to the war. Now, these are a very valuable asset for Ukrainian forces. These are precision-guided munitions, relatively. They're very long range. This is basically like their most capable HIMARS system that they have native to Ukraine. And it's very effective, but we've seen very limited, if really any use throughout the duration of this war, because it's extremely dangerous to do so. These things are very large assets that can be easily targeted and destroyed, and that's kind of what we're seeing throughout this war. As you can see, they're shooting down drones with it. These are really anti-air systems and air defense weaponry, but they're shooting down aircraft, you name it. And so hopefully these get employed more and they're able to maintain their combat capabilities as they are using up their ammunition and whatever else. As we drop down here, we start to get a very intimate look at the war. Now, we've seen more and more helmet camera footage coming out of the Eastern Front than we have seen really throughout the rest of the duration of this war. We've seen some very intimate footage, but a lot of people seem to forget with the backdrop and the political talk regarding all of this heavy weaponry and artillery and HIMARS and aircraft. There are still tens of thousands of troops fighting very close range with each other throughout this entire front line. This is an extremely long front line, and the combat has heated up extremely over the last 24 to 48 hours in all sectors of the front. In the Donetsk, in the Luhansk, especially around Severodonetsk, in Kherson, we're seeing it ramp up along this entire front line. It's something like 500 kilometers or 500 miles or some crazy. I used to say it almost every single day. You'd think I remember, but it's extremely long, and this is one of the reasons why we've seen very slow gains by Russian forces, because they have to be spread so thin. But we are seeing that intimate combat footage now, and it really gives you a different perspective of what this war is actually like for the average Ukrainian soldier. So this is some very intense combat footage right here. This is actually footage out of a Ukrainian trench in a defensive position somewhere along this eastern front. And what happens is a Russian BMP-2 actually begins to assault their trench line, and it dismounts its troops, and they start to go into this trench. But what ends up happening is the crew of the BMP-2 and the troops around it essentially pretend like they're getting ready to surrender. And once those Ukrainian forces pop their heads up, they open fire again on them, and that re-begins the firefight. This is so close that they're within grenade range, and you have to be like within like 50 meters. You have to be as close as you can throw a baseball, essentially, to it within this firefight. And you're going to see what I'm talking about here. This is in a couple parts. I'm not going to show the third part, simply because that shows the aftermath and the casualties of this, and it is a little gory, even if it's blurred out to an extent. But they were successful in defending this. So this is a Ukrainian sniper here on the Eastern Front.
Щось гудить їхня техніка. Сука, піздує сюди. Блять, переліт.
А який переліт?
Переліт. Суки.
А у нас кабачки ще є,
Їдуть сюди, прямо на 12.
Тихо, тихо, тихо.
Що тихо?
Їде. Пацани, їде бак. Заряджаємося.
Готов, сука. Єбать. Вони вже тут, нахуй. Що таке?
Руки, блядь! Блядь, сука, кинь оружие нахуй! Оружие ложи, блядь! Оружие положи, блядь! Оружие, блядь! Положи оружие, я сказал, блядь!
Зброю на підлогу! На підлогу! Я не по тобі.
Давай! Давай ты, блядь! О, блядь, лист, сука, я сказал, давай! Давай, блядь! Ползи сюда, сука! Медленно, нахуй! Руки пойдем на крушение, блядь!
Пацани,
Блядь, сука! Блядь! Блядь!
візьми калаш.
Ни хрена!
Я сказав,
And that rolls immediately into
Сука!
part 2. So let's go take a look at that.
Стрелять, блядь.
Блядь, спокойно!
Блядь, это.
А що, вони здаються? Вони здаються?
Да! Заглушили мотор! Заглушили
Підери
мотор!
здаються.
Заглушили мотор, быстро! Быстро заглушили мотор, или я стреляю! На счет 3, раз! Два!
Ахуй, підери.
РПР.
На! На. Де вони? А? Зараз вам буде подаруночок. Пацани, зараз.
Есть гранаты?
Є.
Давай. Давай. Гранаты есть у кого?
Блять. Є.
Давай, де, гранат.
Граната! Подарунок, підар! Є!
Ну, блядь. Эвка!
Немає. А. Сука. Є, щось дим пішов.
Горить!
Горить, підар!
Эвка! Кидай!
Блять.
Блядь!
So, someone asked, would it be counterproductive to be screaming? No. So, a firefight is extremely loud. It's deafening. Absolutely deafening. And it actually can cause a lot of permanent damage to your ears. I actually have a little bit of that. It's called tinnitus, and that's the random ringing that you get in your ears. It can happen permanently, such as my case. But, it's extremely loud. These are guys in defensive positions. The enemy already knows they're there. Nobody's pretending to be sneaky here. This isn't like, you know, a sniper. You know, he's out alone, unafraid, 10 kilometers behind enemy lines. You know, he's crawling through some long grass, stalking, a general or something. This guy is in a well-established defensive position, being assaulted by the Russians. No one cares that you're yelling. They know you're there. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bothering to attack you. And so what they're screaming about is they're saying, hey, these guys were looking like they're getting ready to surrender. Everyone's kind of popped out. They're kind of, they're not really engaging them anymore. And so they're yelling, hey, we're Ukrainian forces, lay down your weapons, put your weapons down. And then all of a sudden they open back up, so they all duck back into their trenches. And these guys are so close. You can actually see throughout the video where in the tree line in front of him in that second video, you can see where they're shooting from. And he's sitting there and they're like, grenades? Yes, throw the grenades. And so a couple of them take the grenades out, including the sniper there. He pulls out his RGO fragmentation grenade. He pulls it out. He pulls the pin. The first guy throws his. He throws his, and it blows up, just a couple meters in front of him. This is a close range engagement. These guys are right on top of each other. And when it gets hairy like that, yeah, throw grenades. I mean, what do you got to lose? So it's very intimate combat footage. That is the situation playing out throughout this entire front line. When we talk about things like the Battle of Kherson, and when we're talking about the Battle of Severodonetsk, when we're talking about any of the battles who are in the front lines, and you're talking about tactical withdrawals and this, that, and the other, it's not because of just these massive artillery bombardments. Trenches are made to survive those. How do you think the entire First World War was fought? These guys know how to dig trenches. They know how to put themselves in hard defensive emplacements. They've been doing it since 2014. They know what they're doing. But when it's the up close personal assaults that are causing those 60 to 100 casualties a day, and that's KIA, not including the 500 wounded in action, on top of the artillery, on top of the airstrikes. So that's really what's happening here, and we can see it again as there's even more down here. We have yet another video of an engagement between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces. This time, as Ukrainian forces are actually assaulting a Russian position. So let's take a look at that.
Ебать, ты что, блядь, ну ты, сука, баран! Два вперед, блядь! Перезарядка! Что вы, блядь, остались на месте, блядь? Крейта!
Now I know what some people are going to think, and that is that these guys are just absolutely ammo dumping, and what is he actually hitting? Well, that's the thing. So these guys, what he's doing specifically, and you see them do this, is he's actually bounding. So the first thing you do at the opening of an engagement is you establish what's called fire superiority, meaning you lay down as much hate and discontent as you physically can towards the enemy, put their heads down so they stop shooting at you, and then you can maneuver. As they're maneuvering, they're continuing to fire. They're providing suppression, and that's keeping the enemy's heads down so that way they can't pop up and shoot you while you're moving. And he's constantly moving right here. He's in a little bit of cover, not a whole lot considering all he's really got is some logs and some tree stumps, but that might stop a little bit, especially shrapnel. And then he's also putting himself in this really good concealment right here, where he's he's relatively hidden behind tree lines. They know the Russians probably know he's in this general area behind this tree line, but they don't know exactly probably where he is at. And that's kind of how wars are fought. I mean, you're constantly trying to outmaneuver on the enemy. You're laying down as much hate and discontent downrange as you can. You're keeping their heads down until you can get up close and personal with them and kill them. That is how infantry tactics work. You're keeping their heads down, and you're getting up close and personal, and you're taking them out right there before they have a chance to even fire back if you can. And that is kind of the intimacy that I'm talking about, because these guys are going to get closer. That is what they're currently doing in this video, is they're getting closer and closer and closer until they're right on top of the enemy, and now they're going to be in perfect range to actually lay down that hate and discontent onto them and actually take them out and eliminate them. So that's kind of what's happening here. Now, is it the full video? Definitely not. But I'm sure once you get that up close and personal with something, that's not necessarily something you want to share with the world. It's cool. Combat footage is cool. Everyone in the world looks at combat footage and they're like, wow, this must be what it's really like. A lot of it, though, isn't the up close and personal part. A lot of it isn't the graphic, because people don't want to share that. Whether your cause is good or not, no matter what you're doing, no matter how honorable it is, that's not exactly something you want to portray. And really, people in the armed forces, especially those that go into combat zones, really live two different lives. You have the life that you're like when you're back at home. You're in your own country. You're out, maybe even out in training if you're still in the military. But I mean, when you're in a war zone, you're doing some very horrible things, very traumatizing things, and things that you aren't, no matter how good it was in the time, and no matter if you do it again, stuff that as a human being you're a little bit ashamed of, and you're not going to see a lot of that part of it. You'll see the stuff leading up to it, but you're likely not going to see any of the actual very intimate parts. Also, cameras really don't do justice when it comes to how close something is or far away. They have this weird kind of a distortion effect when it comes to that thing. I mean, while this looks like you can't even really see the Russians in either of these videos, these guys are, 50 meters, maybe 100 meters. I mean, they're close. I mean, they're right on top of each other. It's really hard to miss when you're that close. And now we drop down here into Mariupol, and this is actually something that we're hearing from Petro Andrushenko, who is the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol. And this is something that we're also hearing just from other sources, not to disclose them. We do have a little bit of a relay into Ukraine to an extent, thanks to some of our researchers. And we're very thankful for that. But a lot of information just doesn't get disclosed because people are afraid. But some of this information that we have is that the occupational government of Mariupol is refusing to issue death certificates. Specifically, though, unless the individual died of natural causes, and that is what's listed on their certificate. If they died in any way relating to the war, they are to be buried without identification in the mass graves that we have shown here. And they will not be providing any death certificates to their family members. So they're not really hiding the mass graves part. I mean, it's really hard to do that when you kill 20,000 people or more. We know that they had somewhere between 11 and 13 mobile crematoriums in the city at the time when they first started coming in and clearing out the casualties. Those reportedly just didn't work because they needed constant gas supply, and they had destroyed the gas mains and the gas lines when they were bombarding the city. So, and we're also seeing this on U-24. And as you can see, right, like here is someone who was killed, and of course they have the orange ribbon wrapped around it. So this might have been a Russian casualty, but everyone else is a number. Just a number. And that's if you're lucky. But it gets a little bit better when we come down to Berdyansk. Berdyansk is an operational port. And it's a port down here that was used because Mariupol hadn't been captured yet. Odessa, obviously, they were probably planning an amphibious landing. Then Ukraine sunk the Moskva, and that kind of cancels the landing because there goes all of your fire support. And also, the Odessa is just absolutely horrendously well defended for any kind of a Russian assault at this point. I don't think they would capture Odessa in a million years. But down here in Berdyansk, this is a port city, and it is operational. You can see the port down here. It's much smaller, but this is where a lot of Russian supplies are coming into the south. They're being transported into the south via ship, and there they can offload it, whether that's tanks or tanks, trucks, fuel, food, ammunition, medical supplies, you name it. It's all coming into, a lot of it's coming into this port. And Russia is saying that they were demining, but they would have done that before they even brought any ships in here. So we know that's probably not the case, as there was a large explosion here in Berdyansk, right there on the port, and we're actually being led to believe at this point that it was partisan activity. They sabotaged the port, putting it partially out of commission while they're offloading supplies, and we can see that here. So let's take a look. Sorry, I'm going to restart that. I appeared to cut it.
Собаки уже не радуются. Я сняла.
I love how this guy is just out here in the water, and he just looks over. There's this giant explosion next to him. He's just like, and all of a sudden, he just kind of stays there. He's like, man, this water feels good. And he just like runs his hands through his hair. He's like, another day in Ukraine, I guess. Well, I mean, what's he gonna do? But I mean, he's just out there trying to enjoy the beach, enjoy some kind of normality here, despite everything going on. And all of a sudden, there's just this giant explosion next to him. He just doesn't really seem to care. I find that kind of funny. But obviously, that's a pretty massive explosion. That's not demining. If they were going to demine it, they wouldn't do it on the port, and it wouldn't be that big. That's rather dangerous and hazardous, considering you have a bunch of fuel, ammunition, valuable supplies, all sitting there on that port. So that's probably some partisan activity right there. And it wouldn't be the first time. We've seen partisan activity before. I actually got a couple of comments on some older videos, and they were talking very pro-Russian, very pro-Russian individual. And specifically, they were talking about the atrocities up in Bucha, Irpin, and Hostomel. And I've commented back and forth. They were saying, well, the investigations, have shown, the reports have shown from these forensic investigations, like these were Ukrainians killing Russian collaborators. And of course, I refuted, considering everything we've seen on this channel. But they said, well, but they aren't wrong that Ukrainians are killing collaborators. I will give them that much. They just didn't do it up in Bucha and Hostomel, as we can tell by satellite footage. The partisans, though, have no problem doing that. We've seen that happen in Melitopol. We've seen that happen in Kherson. We've seen it happen all over the occupied zones wherever partisan activity is currently ongoing. They're killing Russian troops. They are conducting sabotage or killing collaborators. I mean, but that's what a partisan does. That is what a resistance movement does, because anyone you can knock out in the chain of command is somebody, and anyone you can, get rid of that would undermine what you're trying to do is a target. And when you are actively collaborating with Russian forces and telling them where Ukrainian positions are, who supports the Ukrainians, and these people are getting carried off to filtration camps and or never to be seen again. I mean, that's just kind of you got to shut them up, and there's a quick way to do it, and there's a long way to do it, and it's a lot easier to just do it the quick way. So I'm not disregarding that Ukrainians are killing. I'm not going to say that they aren't killing people that are not, killing people that are collaborating. It's just the partisans are doing that. Ukrainian troops really don't have the time to do that. That would take weeks to do, and it wasn't weeks. So just to address that here on the stream, if you see those comments, or you see me commenting back, that's just kind of how it goes. I tried to at least keep it amicable. But we can see that Russian propaganda is starting to make its way onto the streets of Kakova. Now, this is not Nova Kakova, which is right next door. This is just the city of Kakova, which is just a little bit to the north. And basically, what they're doing is they basically shut off all of the communication in the occupied zones. I mean, they're giving them Russian SIM cards, Russian citizenship, forcing them to use the ruble. They're transferring everything over to be Russian. I mean, just like they did in Crimea, just like they did in the separatist regions before all of this happened. They're doing the same thing here. They're consolidating. We've already talked about that. And now, since they've shut off all of the other broadcasts in the area, you can't get like TV channels or anything. Not a problem. We got loudspeakers. Take a look at this, or really a listen.
и со всей ответственностью и пониманием готовы содействовать реализации ваших неотъемлемых прав. Мы осознаем, что каждому из нас необходимо держать связь с родственниками из других регионов, иметь доступ к банковским и другим интернет-сервисам, получать актуальную новостную информацию и работать удаленно. Действия киевского режима.
Now that is creepy, one. And two, slightly terrifying. You want to talk about an authoritarian regime. If that doesn't make you think of any other place in the world, you know, any other dictatorship or authoritarian regime, I don't know what does. Because that seems like... I mean, that's the same kind of thing. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, but V for Vendetta. Where they have loudspeakers everywhere because of stuff like this. Like, that's just... I mean, I that's all I can think of when I see this is just the loudspeakers that get from V for Vendetta that literally get taken over by V and used against their own government. But that's but yeah, that's just creepy, and to hear it's really creepy too. It's just, I don't know, I don't like it. I don't think anyone does. And in the Kherson region, I was talking earlier about people being taken away and never seen again, especially when it comes to filtration camps. We're seeing that reportedly in Kherson, and this is according to some of our sources. Not going to disclose anything. This is a little bit of a relay. It's a little bit difficult to get stuff directly out of Ukraine unless it's going through other independent sources. But luckily we have people within the staff team that can get some very limited information. And what we're hearing from some of these relays is that according to sources inside of Kherson, Russian soldiers have reportedly been wearing Ukrainian uniforms that they have captured and meeting up with civilians in their homes and asking for Russian positions. Those that disclose those Russian positions are reportedly arrested on the spot and taken away to an unknown location, and none have supposedly returned at this point. Now, this is... First of all, this is a war crime. Second of all, I'll have to look this up, but you can't wear... If you are a uniformed military, you cannot, and you're actively conducting military operations, as this would be under a occupational force, you cannot transfer into the clothes of the enemy as an active military combatant or into civilian attire, because that allows you to do some very naughty things. That is what we're seeing here. I'll be more than happy to go find that information for you in the future, should you want it. But I don't think I really need to, because the actions speak louder than words. Should this become true, or should this be true, this would be absolutely horrendous, and this leaves the question open as to where these people are going. And there's a couple of different options. You have filtration camps, you have interrogations, you have torture. You have, I say interrogations and torture as if they wouldn't be the same thing. And you also have, of course, just execution, which is something that we saw up in Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, and pretty much everywhere else. Everywhere else. I don't know what you call the bombing of Mariupol other than a mass execution of people. But that is what we're hearing. We do not have anything to confirm this. This is deep inside of occupied territory right now, and I don't think we're going to know until it comes out at a later date. And that's just the unfortunate truth for a lot of things regarding what's happening in the occupied zones. But as the fighting here in Kherson continues to ramp up, so does the shelling. You're going to see a correlation throughout the entirety of this war, that as Ukrainian forces start conducting these counteroffensives in places, that they shell the nearest largest city. We've seen it with Mykolaiv. They started the counteroffensive earlier, a couple months ago. They shelled the absolute crap out of Mykolaiv. In fact, not even the dead got rest, because they even shelled a cemetery. In Kharkiv, They were pushing back the Russians. What happened? They fired a crap ton of artillery into Kharkiv. You saw it in Sumy. You saw it in Chernihiv. You saw it in Kyiv. Of course, they were trying to take Kyiv at the time. Mariupol was besieged, so that's as you will. But Severodonetsk. I mean, just look at Severodonetsk. Look at Bakhmut. I mean, as counteroffensive happened, what happens? Or, even better, Zaporizhia. The Ukrainians recaptured some villages up here, and then they just started shelling Zaporizhia and bombing Zaporizhia. That is what, I mean, why? Probably a little bit of a terror thing, because now they have to expend more air defense systems and stuff to protect this giant civilian population around Mykolaiv from air attacks that could be used to defend against defending Ukrainian forces as they advance. But also, I don't understand what tactical advantage it has to bomb a major civilian populace just because you're getting counterattacked. Because you're wasting ammunition and resources attacking Mykolaiv when you could be attacking your enemy. But that is unfortunately what's happening, and that's what we're seeing here. So, of course, it's blurred out to an extent. Once again, Ukrainian laws regarding this, you're going to see this. We've seen this now for some time. Just understand these people don't want to go to jail, and they also don't want to help the Russians get any more accurate with their artillery. So let's take a look. So, obviously some rather terrible things happening across all of Ukraine. And I hope this gave you a little bit of a more intimate picture as to what's going on. Especially for the average, Ukrainian soldier there on the front lines. War is not won with artillery or air support. It's a combination of many things, but ultimately it's the sacrifice of whoever that individual is on the ground. That has to do some rather shameful and horrendous things for the cause. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move into the international news, which there's a couple of different developments here in Europe regarding Ukraine. And the first one is that Russian ballistic missiles fired from Belgorod tonight, and they reportedly struck an industrial complex in the city of Kharkiv. Now, we don't have anything out of Kharkiv regarding this, but we do know these ballistic missiles are being used. These are reportedly Iskanders, and we do have some video footage out of Belgorod to depict this. So let's take a look. So roughly from where this guy is, it's about 7 or 8 seconds. So that's either 7 or 8 miles where they're getting launched from where he's at. So it's just outside the city here of Belgorod. As we jump up here to Moscow, war by proxy. That is what is being said right now about Russia's war. The deputy chairman of the Security Council, Medvedev, stated that the United States had declared war by proxy against Russia And this comes as increasing rhetoric from the Kremlin really shifts from a war against Ukraine to a broader global conflict against the United States and NATO. This wouldn't be the first time this same kind of thing was talked about in Syria. However, obviously the tensions and the situation is a little bit more immediate here in Ukraine, and the assistance and direct conflict in Ukraine against Russia really escalates those tensions much further than they have ever been in the past. And this isn't us saying this. This is RIA News, which is a government-controlled media agency, saying this. And we have the article. Take a look. So this is RIA News. I'm going to hit translate here. Medvedev said that the United States declared Russia war by proxy. So he's saying that that the United States has declared war because in response to Russia's special military operation in Ukraine by supplying Kyiv with weapons and supporting the militaristic frenzy fighting to the last Ukrainian. So that is insane. And he did this on Al Jazeera apparently. So that's just, I mean, that's crazy. Absolutely insane. That he's even talking about this, and that they're calling for this. I mean, and realistically, what are they going to do? That's the question in everyone's mind, because we don't know what Russia's going to do. Russia has thrown everyone for a loop on just about everything they have done. Their May 9th victory speech, the war in Ukraine, are they going to use nuclear weapons? Or are they not going to use nuclear weapons? They say they're not going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine and then immediately hold nuclear exercises. I mean, that's kind of where it's at. Like, we just don't know. Anything is on the table. They've talked about Poland being the next target for invasion, for denazification of Poland, who, by the way, Poles were the second largest population killed under the Holocaust, might I remind you, just because they were Polish, and they were also invaded by both Germany and the Soviet Union simultaneously. So that's World War II, the beginning of World War II in a nutshell, 1939. And so it's mind-boggling that they're talking about this, because your entire military force realistically is in Ukraine right now. They're getting their faces kicked in essentially by the Ukrainian forces. And all you have left really is a nuclear arsenal, and that's going to end well for you. Probably not. So what are you really going to do other than talk? Because that's kind of where the situation is right now. Because they would require a full mobilization of Russia to even have the forces for a war, and that would take months. That would take an extensive amount of logistical equipment that they just don't have. I don't even think they would have the weaponry, the body armor, the equipment to really supply their forces. We're seeing Mosin Nagants, which have been used since the 1800s here in Ukraine. I can't imagine what the stockpiles at home are looking like. And then also, you have to train everyone that you conscript. Otherwise, what are they going to do? You have a bunch of untrained people. You basically have a militia that you're throwing at one of, essentially 32 countries at this point, because in Finland and Sweden, you're going to throw basically a militia of poorly equipped, ill-trained individuals with inadequate equipment in a war that you're not prepared for because you weren't prepared for the first one you started, against NATO, which has some of the best trained and best equipped militaries in the world. I don't think so. So I wouldn't be too worried about a war kicking off. I just wouldn't, because, I mean, like I said, the Russians aren't stupid. Maybe they underestimated Ukraine, and we can tell that, but they aren't stupid. And one thing that someone likes more than, killing whoever their enemy is, and like for Iran, for instance, the one thing Iran wants more than to kill Americans, because, I mean, that's just kind of the Iranian government's thing right now, is to keep their power. And Putin would really like to stay in power, and if he starts a larger war, he's not going to. Even if he survives, even if it comes to a nuclear war, if he doesn't have a country to rule over, then he's the ruler of nothing. And he's also hated by his own people, which we've already seen he kind of already is to an extent. And as we drop down here into Moldova, which has the Transnistria region. The Transnistria region is a breakaway region that's existed for like 30 years. This is the DONBAS before the DONBAS by about 20 years. That is Transnistria, and the capital of Transnistria is Tiraspol. The Russian Federation does have a task force here in Transnistria. Basically, it's a Russian-occupied territory of Moldova that's not recognized by anybody else but Russia, similar to Luhansk and Donetsk. But Moldova, which controls all of this territory, has banned the broadcasting of Russian news, propaganda shows, as well as war films from the Russian Federation, which is the speaker, and this is coming from the speaker of the Moldovan parliament. So, yeah, Moldova's not having it. They're not having it, especially since tensions heated up over in this region rather recently. They're not doing it. This is not going to be a similar situation that any other country may find itself in. They're not going to deal with it, and we've seen that in other countries as well. And finally, that brings us down into the Middle East, where things are ramping up a little bit. So today, a Turkish kamikaze drone hit a hospital. Specifically, it was a gynecology clinic in Tel Rifat, which is in northern Syria. It's north of Aleppo. This is one of the targets for the Turkish forces as they are pushing through and expanding the 30-kilometer kind of border area, their buffer zone, security zone, whatever they want to call it. I really don't care what they call it. They basically want to invade further, but they used a kamikaze drone essentially to hit this gynecology clinic. And you can see the damage here. So that really starts to signal, the kind of beginning of operations. I mean, they're whatever they're planning on doing. Now, this could have been pro-Turkish militia too, and we just don't know, but that is what's being reported thus far. That's not the only thing. 6 Russian helicopters were also seen flying over Tel Rifat today, and it's not clear if the Russians are going to join in this operation. Obviously, there's tensions over Ukraine between Turkey and Russia, but those tensions aren't nearly as bad as you would think. I mean, even though that Turkey has supplied the Bayraktar TB2 drone that we've seen so effective in Ukraine against Russian forces, and even though Turkey is a member of NATO, Turkey is really kind of the outlier in NATO. It's kind of the redheaded stepchild of NATO. Turkey has some rather extremist beliefs. They are a very, I want to say, ethnically driven country as a government. They've really oppressed the Kurds, which every other NATO ally has backed during the coalition inside of Syria. They continue to fight the Kurds inside of Turkey. Now, I'm not saying the Kurds are perfect. The Marxist PKK can definitely be, especially inside of Turkey, there's very bitterness between Turks and the Kurds there, and the PKK are not saints in themselves. So there is some understanding within country borders, but this is extended into northern Iraq and northern Syria rather heavily. And the relationship, especially with Erdogan saying he's going to veto Sweden and Finland over backing the Kurds, who he says they back terrorists, and then also coordinating with Russia to the extent that they're conducting joint patrols in this region, is really concerning. Turkey's one of those countries that if any country was going to either leave NATO or it would be kicked out of NATO, Turkey is the country to do it, that it would happen to. So that's kind of the situation there. And we can see these Russian helicopters flying over the countryside here as well. So I've brought up the bombing of Aleppo in this region before, and something that I found absolutely just insane when I was in Syria was something that you can see in this photo. The only structure left undamaged or even standing is the mosque. Everything else is flattened. Most of these are made out of mud. They're just mud houses. I mean, that's what they have available to them. They're clay and mud houses. So when you hit them with a bomb, they just crumble into dust. Now, there has been a fighting for some time now, but almost every small village you go through in Syria is like this. They're absolutely flattened, and the only structure left standing is the mosque. Russia and the Assad regime bombed Aleppo into submission. That is essentially what happened. And it wasn't entirely successful. There's still extensive fighting amongst multiple factions in this region. But I mean, if I recommend you go and look up videos of Aleppo and what it looks like. The city is absolutely flattened. It's destroyed. It is Aleppo, and the villages in Syria are the Mariupol before Mariupol. That really tells you they used very similar tactics in this conflict against them. They've even used chemical weapons against civilian populations. And it's insane. The level of destruction is insane when it comes to modern warfare. And this is a perfect, this little image here, and I'm actually going to zoom in here, is the perfect emphasis on what I'm talking about. Everything is flattened except for this one building which has gaping holes in it and the mosque. That's it. That's all that's left of this village. And as we move further south, we can see that the Syrian National Army is actually preparing for the eventual conflict with Turkish forces. Now, these were military exercises that roughly 1,100 pro-Turkish fighters actually showed up to. But these are, the PKK is essentially waiting for the start of this operation. The PKK is already, they're ready to go. I mean, they've been ready to go. They knew this was probably coming. But the Syrian National Army is actually holding military exercises because they pushed a lot of their forces up into this border region in anticipation for this, because Syria doesn't want this either. Now, these guys, this is a T-55, by the way, but these guys, while the Kurds and the SDF and all of these guys don't get along, and they're actually actively fighting the Syrian National Army and the pro-Syrian militias, there's nothing more unifying than a common enemy, and Turkey is that common enemy. So when they invade, like they did back in 2019-2020, the SDF and the Assad regime put aside their differences and fought together against Turkey, and they're getting ready to do that again. And a lot of this is propaganda footage. I mean, it's Syria. I mean, it's a regime. It's the Assad regime. But that's kind of what you're seeing here. But in Iraq, people have no quarry for waiting for an operation because there's already one ongoing in northern Iraq. And what unidentified individuals, we don't know what group did this, though we can draw some assumptions based off of recent events, used what they called a kamikaze UAV, probably just a quadcopter with a hand grenade in it, and fired several rockets in the direction of Turkish armed forces located in the Bashika district. Air defense systems of the Turkish unit did shoot down 2 drones. There's no information about casualties, destruction, or whatnot. That stuff just isn't going to get released to us. But that, I mean, they don't know exactly who's behind it, but considering it's in northern Iraq, this is roughly Iraqi Kurdistan. So you're probably talking about the PKK in this area and the Peshmerga not really waiting, especially since there already is a Turkish military operation inside of northern Iraq. So that's kind of the situation up there. we can draw some conclusions from it. As we go over here to Kabul, we actually have some rather interesting news. We have some rather shocking news, in fact. And that's because an Indian delegation actually arrived inside of Kabul today. They met with the Taliban foreign minister, Mutaki, and they're having conversations regarding, one, of course, he thanked India for humanitarian assistance, because India has actually been providing humanitarian assistance to the Taliban and to Afghanistan as a whole. And they're wanting to have India resume economic projects, so investing in Afghanistan, Afghani infrastructures and businesses. They want to build some scholarships for Afghani students. They want to build economic relations and increase trade. That is what they're trying to do. Afghanistan has shifted from, the war's over. The main part of the war is over. While they're still fighting resistance groups like Ahmed al-Massoud II, they are building relationships because they're a country now. They have to run a country. Otherwise, they aren't going to stay in power. So that's currently what's happening. The Taliban are trying to make a good face of it, even if it's only at half value, really. But we can see this delegation arriving here. So, a rather shocking thing to happen, but at the same time, it's also kind of expected because we're a global world now, and we have, even if what happened in Afghanistan isn't kosher with everybody, you have to move on at some point, and that's what a lot of the regional countries are trying to do. And actually, a little bit of cool news out of Qatar today, and that's because Qatar actually made some rather cool advancements in hydroponics. So Qatar is actually trying to become food self-sufficient by 2023. They don't want to have to take any imports from anybody, and that's a really big goal considering they're in the middle of the desert. I mean, you want to grow things, this isn't the place to do it, okay? And it's 40 plus degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius, which is about 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and they're finding ways to grow vegetables and fruits. They're using hydroponics. Hydroponics basically takes water, and you put it in these tanks, and you have fish in there, and then they have bacteria inside these aquariums. It actually provides both meat because of the fish, and you can breed fish inside the hydroponic centers, and it also provides the ability to grow food over top of it. It's a really cool concept. It's actually one of the concepts that they are thinking of using for places like if we were to ever build a base on the moon, or as a step to, say, a base on Mars for Mars colonies. This is a way to provide sustaining meals that are fresh and are very much more nutrient rich. Basically, the feces from the aquatic plants and from the fish gets converted by a bacteria into plant fertilizer. It's very rich in nitrogen, but this purifies the water in the aquarium, so it's all self-sufficient. And that in turn also allows for the plants to get whatever water they need, and also to grow because of the plant fertilizer from the bacteria. So this allows them to grow massive amounts of plants in a controlled setting. And that means that they can do that anywhere, including here in the middle of the desert. They just need hydroponic bases. So very cool concept. And the fact that they've taken it so far as to be able to do this in 104 degree weather is mind-boggling, but it's really cool because this kind of advances are what's going to help us, not just, with food insecurity regions like this where it's difficult to grow things, but also for things in expansion into space, for Mars missions, for instance. So that's really cool. We can take a look at that here. So this is all hydroponics. Underneath these are fish tanks, essentially. They're aquariums. So you just got to maintain that, and then you're all good. Everything else takes care of itself. And so we're actually gonna skip China here for a moment. We're actually gonna drop down here into Africa, and there's a couple of different things unfortunately happening in Africa. Mozambique is suffering from a very increasingly violent Islamic State. So Mozambique has a very large section of the Islamic State in Africa. It's very difficult for Mozambique to fight off. They are not doing so well in the fight against ISIS, and we're seeing the repercussion of that as they are conducting very intense operations, military operations. They're extremely powerful in this part of the world, and especially in Cabo Delgado, which is part of Mozambique, where they're attacking Christians, military, citizens, you name it. They're attacking them and they're killing them, and they're doing this on multiple fronts. So this is a very terrible situation, but that's unfortunately what's happening. As we jump over here into Burkina Faso, an unknown group of militants attacked Djibo, and this is in the province of Soum, and 6 security officials were killed and 8 more were injured in the attack, which occurred yesterday inside of the city of Djibo. It's spelled with a D, or a J, just depending on how you write it. But apparently they fired on basically a base or a checkpoint of military personnel and gendarmerie, which are basically a security service. They're like a militarized police force. That's what a gendarmerie is. And during the second attack, they attempted to rob a bunch of shops, but the security forces noticed those militants. They opened fire. They ended up getting in a firefight. They killed 7 of them, but they obviously lost 6 security officers. No one has taken responsibility for the attack, and there are multiple groups attacking here, but this is the official press release regarding that. Most of this is in French. French is one of the international languages, 1, and 2, a lot of these areas were French colonies prior to gaining independence. And as we move over here into Mali, 2 Red Cross officers were killed near Kayes yesterday. The International Committee of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent is an independent organization that provides humanitarian aid and assistance, and they also oversee the Geneva Convention. That is what their directorate is. That is what their purpose is. This is why there's a Red Cross or Red Crescent on every military medical vehicle. And they are a huge organization that does this globally. They do this in every single country in the world that they have access to. And I think the one exception to that is like North Korea. If even North Korea, I think they have a little bit of access there. But unfortunately, this does put them in harm's way, and 2 of them were killed and 2 were injured by an unknown group of attackers yesterday. And it's relatively safe within this region, which is one of the disturbing parts. But they reportedly fired on the humanitarian convoy, on a humanitarian movement convoy, and dragged the injured workers out, fled in a vehicle, and loaded all of their medical equipment that they were taking with them. But once again, no one has taken responsibility for this attack either. And there is the official release from the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. And a terrible story, but a very wild one. You could take a Florida man and put them in this, and it would not change the story whatsoever. But this is out of Vancouver, and an unknown person basically knocked down a man. He stabbed him in the back and in the neck and in the head, killed him. He died in the hospital, and then he chased off a bunch of people with a machete near East Hastings Street in Vancouver. Then, he beat up a guy. And then he tried to steal a motorcycle. And then that's where he was stopped by local law enforcement. Nobody knew each other. There is no real motive for the attack. No one knows why this happened. But it's just a really wild attack. I mean, this is not something that you really expect out of Canada, considering it's Canada. They're like the nicest people in the world. They're known for saying sorry or sorry or however you want to pronounce it, depending on if you're Canadian. But that's wild. It's a wild ride. But yeah, I could literally take this scenario, drop it in Florida, and change some, and say instead of Vancouver man, and it's Florida man, and it would be totally believable. It's wild. It's a Florida man story out of Canada. But very terrible situation, nonetheless. But that's just kind of what's happening right now. I don't understand what's going on with the world at this point. I think everyone's kind of lost it. But luckily, we have other things to cheer us up because we are back in China, which I skipped over. And that is because if we go all the way over here, and we go to Xinjiang province, so roughly 17 million years ago, there's a relative that was discovered here of the giraffe. The cool thing about this is it's not a giraffe because it actually has a really short neck, but it's got a very thick, stumpy neck with a very thick skull. It's a newly discovered giraffe relative. Now it's extinct, but I'm not even going to attempt probably to pronounce this. The Discovery ZG. Discovery X ZG. It had a bony disc-like shield on the top of its skull and a protective layer of keratin. So very similar to how like bulls and rams like headbutt each other, and also other dinosaurs that have been discovered in the past. There's kind of a lineage for this. But what this is it's a specimen. It's basically really closely related. And to the giraffe, and they found all sorts of these kind of fossilized bones of this thing. Very robust, very thick. It's really made to take impacts. But this is a artistic representation of what they have found. So once you can kind of see what they're talking about when it comes to the giraffe, I'm sure that's some of the inspiration here, but that's kind of cool. And really, when you consider what a giraffe is, it's kind of an interesting concept, but they do still hit each other in the head. They just use their really long necks to do it. But this is the artistic image depicted from Wang et al. In Science. So photo credits to them. But we found this on Live Science originally. So if you want some more information, you can go and check that out. But with that actually wraps up all of the news today. A lot of really not so great things happening. Very intense combat in Ukraine. Very intimate combat. Enough that it was one of the competing titles for this because it's very intimate. It's not something that everyone talks about, and there's a lot of people that once this war ends, a lot of those that fought in this war are going to be dealing with it for the rest of their lives. That's something that you really see coming out of war zones everywhere. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a thing. And it's not just war that causes that, of course, but it is a leading thing for it. And these are very traumatic experiences for a lot of people, the civilian population included, those fighting on the front lines. So while you are hearing from all sorts of media sources about things like the HIMARS and the artillery we're sending and the drones and all this cool heavy weaponry that everyone's talking about, don't forget that it all comes down to that one guy that he will never be known what his name is on the front lines, and that is who is winning this war. And so with that, please don't forget to check out the video description below, because there are a lot of people affected by not just this war, but all sorts of stuff going on throughout the world. And we want to be able to be the news that gives back. We want to be able to help the people immediately affected by these very same news stories that we are talking about here in this stream. But you can only do that really with your support. So please, if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, please give us a like and subscribe. It helps us reach more people, and the more people that come and join us here, the more good we can do as a whole. So I appreciate those that have already supported us. I appreciate the staff team that really puts this together. Once again, I only really lend my voice to this. So they are the ones that find this and really put it together. They do a lot of great things. So I cannot appreciate them enough, and I cannot give them enough thanks. So please make sure you're giving thanks to the staff as well. Other than that, if you have more sources or even more importantly, if you have more donation links, please let us know on our Discord. Please let a staff member know. We're all on there. The link is in the description for you, so you can come join the community. You can also pick my brain and pick the brains of everyone else. There's a lot of very intelligent individuals there. And we have sections for the war in Ukraine. We have sections for the Middle East and Africa, South America, North America, East Asia. You can talk about anywhere in the world too. There's discussion threads, there's media threads on there, there's general stuff to talk about. So go on there. We have a relatively active community. A lot of stuff gets posted on there regarding the war in Ukraine for those that are interested in knowing more. But come join us on there. Let us know if you have any sources that we can go through. We're currently vetting some community, some different links that we got from the community for more additional fundraisers. We're still going through that process, but they will get added to the stream if they make it through that process. So if you have any more, let us know. And that goes for anywhere in the world. We're still looking for Brazil and Mexico and Durban, South America. So please let us know. We would love to be able to help even more people. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you found this very knowledgeable. I hope that you, your family, and your friends remain safe. And I also hope that if you're not safe currently, that you find that safety and security in the very near future. I hope that you will join us once again tomorrow as we go through yet another 24 hours of review over the world news. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Paul from the New News, and you guys have a wonderful night. Bye.